The morning I found out, I was making coffee. That's the detail that still gets me. The absolute mundanity of it. I was standing in Sophie's kitchen in my old gray hoodie, spooning grounds into the filter, listening to the sound of her shower running, feeling like a man who had his life figured out. We had been together for 3 years. I knew which side of the bed she preferred. I knew she cried at nature documentaries but denied it every single time. I knew she kept a spare hair tie around the gear shift of her car, and that she always ordered the same thing at every restaurant we went to, then spent 20 minutes pretending to study the menu first. I knew her, or I thought I did, which is the cruelest version of knowing someone there is. Her phone buzzed on the counter beside the coffee maker. I didn't mean to look. I want to make that clear, not to excuse myself, but because it matters. The way the universe sometimes just hands you the knife. The screen lit up, and the preview sat right there in plain sight. Miss you already. Last night was everything. The name above it said Daniel. I stood there holding the coffee spoon. The shower was still running. Steam drifted under the bathroom door. Outside, a car alarm went off 2 streets over and then stopped. I read the message again. Miss you already. Last night was everything. I set the spoon down very carefully on the counter, as if I were defusing something. My hands were not shaking yet. That would come later. I picked up her phone. This is the part I am not ashamed of. If you hand someone 3 years of your life, 3 years of showing up, of building something, arts of choosing them daily even on the days it costs you, then you have earned 1 moment of looking. I opened the thread. I read it from the beginning. I stood in that kitchen while the coffee maker gurgled and the shower ran, and I read every message. And with each one, I felt something in my chest go very quiet, the way a fire goes quiet when all the oxygen has finally been consumed. It had been going on for 4 months. Daniel was in her postgraduate study group. They had started meeting for coffee to go over research notes, and somewhere in the progression of those meetings, documented in photographs and voice messages and paragraphs of intimate text that I will not describe in detail, it had become something else entirely. She had told me about Daniel exactly once, about 3 months ago, right when I had asked why she was coming home late on Tuesday evenings. Just a study buddy, she had said, laughing a little at the phrase, like it was charmingly old-fashioned. We're working through the same module, you know how it is. I had nodded. I had made her tea that night. I had asked how the studying was going. The shower turned off. I put her phone back exactly where it had been. I picked up the coffee spoon. I finished making the coffee. And when Sophie walked out of the bathroom in her robe, towel drying her hair, and said, "Good morning, you," with that smile I had loved for 3 years, I smiled back, handed her a mug, and said good morning. I had already decided. Not revenge, not yet. That word came later. What I had decided in those 2 minutes was simpler and more profound. I was done being the man who didn't know. But whatever happened next, I would be the one who chose it, not the one it happened to. I left her apartment that morning with my bag over my shoulder and my coffee half finished on the counter, and my entire understanding of my own life restructured from the foundation up. She kissed me goodbye at the door. I kissed her back. I drove to my apartment, sat on my couch in my coat, and stared at the wall for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and started researching universities. Here is what people don't understand about the specific grief of betrayal. It isn't the pain that's hardest to manage. Pain is familiar. Pain you can breathe through. What's hardest is the retrospective restructuring, the way every memory you own gets quietly re-released with new information, the way you have to go back through 3 years of your life and understand that large portions of it were a performance you weren't aware you were watching. Every Tuesday evening. Every time she mentioned him casually, and then didn't mention him again. Every time she had been on her phone and turned the screen slightly away from me, and I had thought nothing of it because I trusted her absolutely. That trust had not been naivety. I needed to be clear about that, at least to myself. Trusting someone you love is not stupidity. It is the entire point of loving someone. The stupidity would have been continuing to trust her now that I knew, and that I was not prepared to do. I gave myself 48 hours to break down. I think that sounds cold, but it was actually the most compassionate thing I have ever done for myself. I gave myself 2 days to feel the full weight of it, to sit with the grief and the rage and the humiliation and let them move through me without trying to manage them. I cried once, briefly, and it surprised me with its intensity. I punched a pillow, which felt ridiculous but helped. I called my older brother, David, who drove over without asking questions, and sat with me for 4 hours watching football neither of us cared about. I told him what I had found. He was quiet for a long moment and then said, "What do you need?" Not "she's terrible," or "you deserve better," or any of the scripts people reach for in these moments. Just, "What do you need?" What I needed, I told him, was to not be the person this was happening to. I needed to be the person making something happen. He nodded, like that made complete sense. So what are you going to do? I had spent 48 hours thinking about exactly that. The university was called Harwick College, and it was in Ashfield, which was 3 cities away. I had found it during 2 hours of research that first morning, and it was not random. Harwick had an exceptional business management program, the kind I had been half considering for 2 years, without ever seriously pursuing because my life was here, because Sophie was here, because inertia is the most comfortable cage ever built. The application deadline for the upcoming term was 6 weeks away. I had a strong academic record from my undergraduate degree, relevant work experience, and suddenly, for the first time in years, absolutely nothing holding me here. I applied that night, but I did not tell Sophie. Not yet. Not for another 3 weeks. And this is the part of the story where I have to be honest about my own psychology, because it is not flattering. The reason I didn't confront her immediately was not weakness. It was not the inability to face the truth, or some pathetic hope that I had misread the messages. I had not misread anything. The reason I waited was that I understood, in some cold, clear part of myself, that confronting her immediately would hand her all the power. She would apologize or she wouldn't. She would cry or she wouldn't. She would have the chance to craft her narrative before I had finished building mine. I did not want to be the man reacting to her betrayal. I wanted to be the man who had already moved past it. So I became, for 3 weeks, the best boyfriend I had ever been. Not because I was weak, because I was building a case, and in the legal sense. Documentation, evidence, clarity, and because I needed time to set things in motion. I met Sophie for dinners. I was warm and present and attentive. I asked about her studies and laughed at her jokes, and drove her to the airport when her mother needed her for a weekend and picked her up when she came back. I was completely, convincingly, heartbreakingly normal. And every single time she mentioned Daniel in passing, study group ran late. Daniel had some good notes on the module. We're presenting together next week. I nodded and said, "That's great," or "sounds productive," and filed it away. What I was actually doing during those 3 weeks, I got the acceptance letter from Harwick on day 9. I enrolled, paid the deposit, and arranged accommodation in the student residences. I called my manager at work and gave 4 weeks' notice, citing personal development, framing it as a positive decision, which it was, even if the circumstances behind it were not. I called my landlord. I began the quiet, systematic process of extracting myself from a life I had built, assuming someone else would be part of it. I moved things from Sophie's apartment back to mine in small quantities, things I'd left there over 3 years. A jacket here, a charger there. so that there was nothing dramatic to explain, no sudden absence she might question. I also called my friend Pete, who had never particularly liked Sophie, and told him the whole story. Pete did not say, "I told you so," which is why I've been friends with him for 11 years. He said, "What do you want me to do?" And I told him that he had the kind of job that involved a lot of public-facing communication. Pete ran a moderately successful local events page that had grown considerably over the past 2 years. The kind of community board where everyone in a 3-city radius saw announcements about local businesses and upcoming events, and occasionally, personal posts that went mildly viral. I'm not going to pretend I hadn't thought about that. And then there was the matter of Daniel. It had taken me less than an hour of basic research to establish that Daniel was not single. He had a girlfriend named Claire who had her own social media presence, and who had, in fact, tagged both herself and Daniel in several photos over the past 4 months, during the exact window of his involvement with Sophie. Claire had no idea. That felt like information with a purpose. Oh, and I held it carefully, waiting for the right moment. On the Saturday of the 3rd week, I texted Sophie and asked if she wanted to come over that evening. She said yes. She'd bring wine. I said perfect. I had cleaned my apartment and left out on the coffee table, very deliberately and very visibly, a printed copy of my Harwick acceptance letter, my enrollment confirmation, and my signed lease for the student housing. Just those 3 documents, fanned out slightly, as if I'd been looking at them, which I had. When Sophie arrived with the wine, she set it down, took off her coat, and her eyes drifted to the table. I watched her read them. I watched the exact moment comprehension arrived. She looked up at me. "Liam, what is this?" "I've been accepted to a postgraduate program," I said. "I start in 6 weeks. I've already sorted the accommodation." "You..." She stared at me. "You didn't tell me you were applying anywhere? You didn't say anything." "No," I agreed. "I didn't." There was a pause. She was trying to read my face and finding something there that confused her. Not anger, not tears, just a kind of settled calm that didn't match the information she was processing. Are you doing this because of us? Did something happen?" "Liam, talk to me." "I want to talk to you," I said. "I want to have an honest conversation. I'd like you to start." She blinked. "Start what?" "An honest conversation," I said again. "About the last 4 months." The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds and felt like a year. I watched the color shift in her face. Not a blush, more like the opposite of a blush, a slow drainage. She knew. Of course she knew. What she was calculating in those 4 seconds was how much I knew. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but the words had no structure to them. They were just sounds she made to fill space. "Sophie," I said. I read the messages. She sat down on my couch, and the wine bottle was still in her hand, and she set it on the floor carefully, and then she put her face in both her hands, and I stood across the room and watched her, and I felt almost nothing. That was the strangest part. I had expected rage. I had expected the explosion that you're supposed to have. What I felt instead was a kind of clean, sorrowful finality, the way you feel when you've been waiting for a diagnosis, and it finally comes. "How long have you known?" she asked from behind her hands. 3 weeks. She looked up at that, or something complicated moved across her face. "You've known for 3 weeks, and you kept..." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I needed to be sure of what I was doing before I said anything." "And what are you doing?" "Leaving," I said. "The program at Harwick is real, and I'm genuinely excited about it. But yes, the timing is connected to this. I'm leaving the city, I'm leaving this apartment, and I'm ending this relationship. I wanted you to hear it from me directly, clearly, with no ambiguity. The crying started then. I had expected that too, and I had prepared myself for it, which was necessary because Sophie had a way of crying that had always undone me. Quiet and genuine, not performed, the kind that came from real pain. I reminded myself, not unkindly but firmly, that her pain was the consequence of her own choices. Liam, please, I know there's nothing I can say that it was a mistake. It was a terrible mistake. I don't even know how it... I'm not interested in the explanation, I said. I want to be honest with you about that. Not because I'm not hurt, I am, but because the explanation doesn't change anything, and I think you know that. You've already decided. Yes. Before you even talked to me. I talked to you, I said. For 3 years, I talked to you. What I did for the last 3 weeks was give myself the time to make a decision I could live with rather than one I made in a moment of rage. She looked at the documents on the coffee table again. The acceptance letter, the enrollment form, the lease. She understood then, I think, the full shape of what she was seeing. Not a reaction. A plan. Oh, something I had built deliberately and carefully while she was still thinking everything was fine. You're really going, she said. I'm really going. She left about 40 minutes later. There was more crying and some anger. A brief, flaring accusation that I was being cold, that I wasn't giving her a chance, that 3 years deserved more than a calm decision. And I listened to all of it without escalating. I was not going to give her the explosive fight she perhaps needed to feel like the ending made sense. What I gave her instead was clarity, and I think in some ways that was harder. When the door closed, I opened the wine she'd brought and poured myself a glass and sat on my couch and felt, beneath the grief, something that took me a moment to identify. Relief. The next morning I called Claire. I had thought carefully about whether to do this, whether it was mine to do, whether it was interference in something that didn't involve me. I had come down on the same side each time I considered it. Claire had the right to know. The same way I had the right to know. She was being deceived by someone she trusted, and I had information that was relevant to her life. If positions were reversed, I would want someone to call me. Nobody had. The call was short and deeply uncomfortable for both of us. I told her who I was, explained the connection, and told her what I had found. I did not exaggerate. I did not perform any emotion. I just told her the facts, the duration, the nature of the messages, my certainty. She was quiet for a long time when I finished, and then she said, "Thank you for telling me." Her voice was absolutely controlled, which told me she was devastated. I told her I was sorry. I meant it. Whatever happened between Claire and Daniel after that phone call, I don't know in full. But 2 weeks later, Pete showed me a post on his community page from Daniel himself, an apparently cathartic public admission about a relationship he had made terrible choices in, framed as a vague apology to everyone affected. The comments were not kind. Mutual friends of Sophie and Daniel began tagging Sophie in various concerned or accusatory ways. The social circle they had both moved in, her postgraduate cohort, his networks, collapsed around them with the particular efficiency of people who had strong opinions and public forums to express them. I heard about it secondhand, mostly through Pete and occasionally through my friend Jen, who had stayed friends with both Sophie and me, and was finding it increasingly uncomfortable to be in Sophie's orbit. I did not post anything myself. I did not need to. The thing about truth is that once it's out, it does its own work. Sophie texted me twice in that week. The first message was angry, something about how I had orchestrated things, how I had set her up, how what I had done was cruel. I read it and did not respond. The second message came 3 days later and was entirely different in tone. Just 3 lines that said she understood why I had done what I did, that she wasn't excusing herself, that she hoped I'd be okay. I read that one too, and I thought about responding. And then I thought about those 4 months of Tuesday evenings, and I put my phone in my pocket and went back to packing. This Ashfield in September is nothing like what I expected, which is to say, it is better. I had expected to feel like I was retreating, and instead I felt like I was arriving somewhere. The campus at Harwick sits on the edge of the city, half urban and half green space, and my student accommodation was a small studio that smelled like fresh paint and had a window that looked out over a courtyard where people sat with coffee between lectures. I was 31, older than most of my cohort, but not unusually so. The program was demanding in a way I had missed without knowing I was missing it. I threw myself into it. Not as escapism, I want to be specific about this, but as genuine investment. I had been drifting for 2 years before this, maintaining rather than building, and there is something about having your assumptions about your life demolished that clarifies your appetite for actually living it. I was the first to arrive in seminars, and often the last to leave. I started talking to my professors beyond the curriculum. I formed a study group with 3 other students: Ryan, who was dry and brilliant and had come back to education after a decade in finance, and Priya and Tom, who were younger and sharper than they looked. And what began as academic collaboration became, over the following months, actual friendship. My professors noticed me. That sounds self-congratulatory, but it's just accurate. When you engage seriously with material, serious people respond to it. By the end of the first semester, I had been asked to assist with a research project that my business strategy professor, Dr. Halverson, was developing, and which would eventually result in a publication I was credited on. That publication would later lead to a job offer, but I didn't know that yet. I was also sleeping well, for the first time in what I realized, retrospectively, had been years. There is a particular low-level anxiety that comes from being in a relationship with someone who is deceiving you. You don't know the source of it. It presents as general restlessness, vague dissatisfaction, a sense that something is slightly off that you can never quite locate. I had lived with that for 4 months, and probably longer. In Ashfield, in my small studio with its courtyard view, that anxiety was simply gone. I was not looking for anyone. I want to be honest about that too. Because sometimes these stories make it seem like recovery moves in a straight line toward a new relationship, and that is not how it happened. What I found first was a version of myself I had forgotten. The version that read until midnight, that had opinions about things, that was interesting to be around because he was genuinely interested in the world rather than half present in it. I met Anna in my 2nd semester in the most banal way possible. We reached for the same book in the university library at the same moment, and then spent 5 minutes being mutually polite about who should take it, and then both agreed it was absurd and went for coffee to decide. She was doing her PhD in organizational behavior, and she was direct and funny and deeply unimpressed by things designed to impress people, which I found almost aggressively attractive. I told her early on, probably too early, that I had come out of something difficult. She told me she had too. Neither of us performed it or made it the center of our early conversations. We just started spending time together, and the time was good, and we kept doing it. I was happy. That is the simple truth. I was genuinely grounded, not performing it, happy. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was living a life I had chosen with full information, and that turned out to make an extraordinary difference. It was 8 months after I left that I ran into Sophie. I had come back to the city for David's birthday. A dinner at his house, nothing large. I had not been back since I left. I was parking near a restaurant when I saw her across the street, and she saw me at almost exactly the same moment, and the encounter was therefore unavoidable. I stood by my car and waited while she crossed. She looked tired in a way that was deeper than physical. It is uncomfortable to watch someone you once loved look like that, and I won't pretend I felt nothing. I felt something, a residual tenderness maybe, the kind that survives even the worst endings. But it was not longing. It was more like seeing an old photograph of a house you used to live in that has since been repainted. She was professionally dressed, but her posture had that subtle inward quality that happens to people when they've been through public humiliation and haven't fully recovered. I knew from the second-hand accounts, Pete, Jen, the drift of information you can't fully avoid, that the last 8 months had not been easy for her, and the professional fallout had been significant. Her postgraduate cohort had fractured. She had lost her research partnership with Daniel, who had reportedly dropped out of the program, and the general social consequences of having your infidelity exposed in a moderately public way had done their work. Her academic timeline had been pushed back. She had moved to a smaller apartment. "You look well," she said, and I could hear both the effort and the sincerity in it. "I am well," I said. She looked at me for a moment, at whatever was visible in my face, the ease of it, the absence of damage. "The program," she said. Are you glad you went?" "Genuinely," I said. "Best decision I've made." There was a pause. A group of people walked between us on the pavement, and we both stepped slightly to the side. And when they had passed, Sophie said, quietly, "I think about it. What you did, how you just built something and then went, without—" She stopped. "I didn't understand it at the time. I thought you were punishing me." "I wasn't," I said. "Or, not only that, I was doing what made sense for my life." "I know," she said. "I know that now." Another pause. "I'm sorry, Liam. I know that doesn't help anything. I just want you to know that I know exactly what I threw away." I looked at her, and I thought about what to say, and what I said was, "I hope things get better for you. I mean that." And I did. Not for her sake, particularly, but because indifference is more honest than ongoing anger, and I had stopped being angry somewhere over the autumn, somewhere between a seminar on organizational theory and a late evening in the library, somewhere in the slow accumulation of a life that was full on its own terms. She nodded. She looked like she might say something else, and then she didn't. She turned and walked away down the street, and I watched her go for a moment, and then I got in my car. I called Anna from the parking lot because I wanted to hear her voice, and she answered on the second ring and asked how David's birthday dinner was, and I said it hadn't started yet, but I'd had an interesting afternoon. And she laughed and said, "Tell me everything." And I sat in my car on that street in a city I used to live in, and did exactly that. 2 years later, I finished the program at Harwick with a distinction. The research paper I co-wrote with Dr. Halverson was published in a journal that, in the specific world of business strategy academics, it is considered reasonably prestigious. 3 weeks after it was published, I received an email from the European operations director of a consultancy I had admired for years, asking if I would be interested in a conversation. That conversation became an interview, which became an offer, which became a job that I accepted and which I have been doing for 8 months now. I work from Ashfield, mostly, occasionally traveling. The work is demanding and specific, and I am very good at it. Anna and I have been together for 1 year and 4 months. It is not a dramatic relationship, by which I mean it doesn't involve the particular drama of loving someone who is deceiving you, which it turns out is the only kind of drama I was never interested in having. It is instead a relationship between 2 people who communicate honestly and find each other interesting and have made room for each other without requiring the other person to disappear into them. I did not know before Anna that a relationship could simply feel like a good thing to have. I had normalized a certain level of low-level difficulty, had filed it under "this is just what relationships are," and discovered that it was not. I heard about Sophie from Jen last year. Not because I asked, but because Jen mentioned it in the course of a longer conversation. Sophie had apparently taken some time out, had done some of the internal work that the previous year had made necessary, and had restarted her academic program at a different institution. I was glad to hear it. In the mild and genuine way I feel glad when anyone is trying to rebuild something. It had nothing to do with me anymore. Daniel, from what Pete had gathered, had left the field entirely and moved back to his hometown. Claire had, by most accounts, moved on and was doing well. I had no particular feelings about any of this beyond a general and detached sense of narrative closure. I am sitting in my apartment in Ashfield as I write this. Anna is in the other room, on a video call with her research supervisor, and outside my window the courtyard has its usual population of students with coffee, and the late afternoon light is that specific September gold that it was when I first arrived here. And I am thinking about what it means to have your life redirected by someone else's betrayal. I don't think Sophie did me a favor. I don't subscribe to the version of this story where her deception was secretly a gift, where I owe her gratitude for the pain she caused me. That's too convenient and too dishonest. What she did was genuinely wrong, and it caused genuine damage, and pretending otherwise is a form of sentimentality I don't have patience for. But I did something with the damage. That part was mine. The morning I stood in her kitchen reading those messages, I could have reacted. I could have erupted in the immediate, consuming way that the situation perhaps warranted. Instead, I put the coffee spoon down, and I thought, with a clarity that still surprises me, you don't have to let this be the thing that happens to you. You can let it be the thing that changes the direction of what you're heading toward. I enrolled in a college 3 cities away. I built something I had been putting off for years. I moved into my own life with both hands, deliberately, and discovered it was a better life than the one I'd been half present in. I don't look back. Not because there's nothing to see. There is, and occasionally I still see it, but because the looking forward is simply more interesting. The coffee is good here. The courtyard light is gold. Anna is laughing at something in the other room. I wouldn't change a single thing.